Somewhere in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, a name echoes through space, Leirya. She was once human, almost. Now she's something more. Light, rhythm, memory, and someone is still calling her name. This is where the soul returns. Welcome to Sci-Fi Sky, but ask yourself, when a name echoes through the stars, is it reaching someone or waking something? Chapter 1, The Living Gift. The chamber was silent, too silent. White walls glowed with a sterile brightness that erased shadows and memory alike. It felt less like a room, more like a waiting mouth, something that had swallowed sound, color, and soul and was still hungry. In the center stood a figure, still, barefoot. She was not human, not quite. Her skin shimmered faintly with violet tones, smooth and glass-like, as if carved from dusk. Her eyes were large, soft, and deep, the color of distant stars, quiet and unreadable. Instead of hair, strands of silver tendrils drifted along her shoulders, swaying with each slow breath. She looked like someone meant for silence. Once she had been called Leirya. Now she was nothing but Unit 341N, a living system, a rare specimen, a gift. The door opened with a hiss of pressurized air. A man stepped in, human, alone. He was tall, built like someone who used to carry a rifle but hadn't touched one in a long time. His dark uniform was plain, edged with old symbols of Earth's distant wars. Scars crossed his jaw, but it was his eyes that stood out, green, quiet, and exhausted, like they had seen too much and believed too little. This was Eli Kairos, once a chaplain on the battlefield, now a man without a chapel, without a cause. He stared at her for a long moment. She did not raise her head. From a hidden speaker, a voice echoed into the silence. As promised, Norelli Class Omega asset, biologically intact, adaptive, obedient, yours. Eli said nothing. A reward, Commander, for loyalty. He walked forward. His boots made no sound on the polished floor. When he stopped in front of her, Leirya slowly lifted her gaze. Their eyes met. She expected command, or contempt. She braced with a cold hand of ownership. She had felt it before, but it didn't come. Instead, he crouched. His movements were slow, careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal or an altar long forgotten. "Do you have a name?" he asked. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The neural cuffs around her wrists pulsed faintly, a warning. She couldn't speak, but her gaze did not break. Eli's hand hovered near the cuff on her arm. He wasn't reaching to take. He looked like he was asking. She tensed. He stopped. "You're afraid," he whispered. Something shifted. It was small, quiet, like a drop of water falling onto still glass. A flicker passed between them, brief, barely there. He saw something. A memory that wasn't his. A shattered temple under red skies. A child singing alone. And she felt something she didn't understand. A warmth in his silence, like someone remembering how to pray. Both of them blinked. Both stepped back. When Eli returned minutes later, the handlers were gone. He stood in the doorway and simply said, "You don't belong in a cage." She looked at him again, not with hope, not yet, but with the faintest spark of recognition, as if her name, long buried under silence and code, had been spoken, without sound. Outside, beyond the station walls, the stars turned slowly, and somewhere deep in the quiet fabric of the universe, the rhythm stirred. It remembered her name, Leirya. Chapter 2, The Man Without Faith. Eli Kairos had once believed in God, not the kind found in books or sermons, but the kind he thought lived between heartbeats on the battlefield, in the silence before an explosion, in the moment when a dying man reached for another's hand instead of his weapon. He had been a chaplain long ago, the kind who prayed over broken bodies, who whispered words of peace while blood pooled in the dirt. And for a time, he believed those prayers meant something, until they stopped working. It wasn't one death that broke him. It was the last one. Her name had been Mara, a medic. She had followed him through 5 campaigns, believed in his faith even after he began to doubt it. She had died trying to save a child caught in a crossfire, a child that wasn't even real, just a holographic decoy set by an enemy drone. When they found her, her hands were still extended, reaching. And God did not reach back. Since then, Eli had stopped praying. He still carried the small silver pendant around his neck, though he never touched it. He still knew the words, but they came like sand now, not water. Dry, gritty, meaningless. Now he served in silence, out on the edge of known space, taking meaningless posts, answering to nobody. And then, they gave him her. The first night after Leirya entered his life, he dreamed of music, but not human music. It was not made of notes or instruments, but something deeper, as if wind had learned how to weep and light had learned how to listen. He stood in a field of low silver grass. Wind moved through it like breath through lungs. And far off, someone was calling his name. Soft, familiar. He turned and woke up. Elsewhere, in a chamber dimly lit by starlight filtered through alloyed glass, Leirya stirred. She had not dreamed in years. Dreams had been taken from her when they took her language, when they buried her voice under cuffs and codes and designations. But that night, she felt something leaking in. She was standing inside a war zone, not of her own. Explosions rumbled like distant thunder. There was fire, smoke, and a man, a human, kneeling in the red mud. His hands trembled over a body he couldn't save. And he was praying, but not with faith. He was praying with emptiness, with rage, with a voice that didn't know if it was speaking to God or to ghosts. It was Eli, and somehow she heard him. The next morning, the readings began to shift. The scientists monitoring her neural biofeed didn't understand it. Her synaptic map, once flat and fading, now flickered with activity. They noted erratic harmonics, emotional pulse tremors, interference patterns inconsistent with standard stimuli. They called it omega instability. But Leirya knew what it was. Something inside her had begun to awaken. The Norelli had once called her kind the rhythm bearers, not because they made sound, but because they carried alignment. Their nervous systems didn't just respond to life around them. They attuned to it, matched it, mirrored it, amplified it. They were said to be born at moments where the will of the universe intersected with the will of flesh, but no one remembered that now. To Earth scientists, she was just an Omega-class neuroadaptive system, a living biointerface, a miracle of design, not destiny. They measured her in voltages, not in visions. Leirya sat on the cot in her assigned chamber, bare, minimal, softly humming with ambient electromagnetic fields. She closed her eyes, and the music came again. But this time, it was warped, like an ancient hymn played through broken speakers. She saw flames, broken helmets, and over it all, Eli's voice. Why didn't you stop it? Why did you let me believe? Each word, a fracture of memory, not hers. But somehow, now within her. Elsewhere, Eli sat alone in the observation deck, watching the stars move in slow arcs. His hands trembled faintly, resting on his knees. He hadn't told anyone about the dreams. He didn't believe in omens, but every night he saw her now, Leirya, not in the cage, but in the field, lit by the same silver wind from his dreams. And her voice, though he had never heard it in waking, echoed through his sleep like something remembered from before his birth. On the fourth night, they both woke at the same moment. Different rooms, same breath, same silence. And for a second, both of them reached, as if a presence had been there and vanished. The neural cuff around Leirya's wrist pulsed once and something cracked beneath it. Not mechanically, biologically. The sensors spiked, a warning was triggered, but she didn't move. Instead, she whispered, no sound, just movement of lips, Eli. And far across the station, Eli heard it. He looked up sharply. The pendant around his neck, forgotten, weightless, had warmed against his chest for the first time in years. Something was waking, not just between them, within them. A bond not born from training or proximity or science, but from something older, something sacred. And in the silent spaces between dreams, the rhythm trembled, not in fear, but in remembrance. Chapter 3, The Name Called in Dreams. He did not remember falling asleep, but Eli knew, without question, that he was dreaming. The world around him was not Earth, nor any starbound colony. It was a landscape made of memory and light, rolling hills of soft silver grass that moved without wind. The sky above was dark violet, laced with constellations he had never seen before, blinking in patterns that felt rhythmic, like breath. Far in the distance, a melody drifted across the horizon. Not music, not sound, but intention, shaped into waves, something that wanted to be heard. Then he heard it. Eli, his name, whispered, not through ears, but into the marrow of his bones. He turned, and there, on the crest of a hill, stood her. Leirya, not in chains, not in gray regulation robes. She wore nothing but light and shadow, wrapped in flickers of color that changed with every breath, silver, blue, violet. Her skin glowed softly in the dark like starlit water, and her eyes, vast and violet, held no fear, only recognition. Around her, the grass seemed to lean toward her presence. The sky above brightened, casting a faint iridescence down her arms and across the glowing constellation-like markings etched into her skin. She reached toward him, palm open, but made no sound. She didn't need to. A pulse of warmth moved through the dream space, gentle, like the memory of touch. Eli took a step forward and woke up. He gasped, lungs tight. The ceiling above him was metal, cold, familiar. But his chest ached with something missing. His name still echoed in his ears, but it hadn't been a human voice. It was softer, wider, like language painted in light, and it had come from her. Meanwhile, 3 decks below, Leirya sat cross-legged in darkness. She had disconnected herself from the sensors, severed her cuffs for a few minutes before the system reconnected. She had learned to do this quietly, without setting off alarms. Her eyes were closed, but inside her, something surged. For the first time in cycles, she could feel echoes. Her neural lattice, once flattened by the suppressors, had begun to reweave itself, thread by thread. A rhythm was returning. Not hers, theirs, more specifically his, the man, Eli. In the beginning, it had been faint. She had felt something when he stood near, a flicker of synchrony in the electromagnetic aura, but now it had grown stronger. She had dreamed of his memories. She had seen his lost ones, felt his guilt, tasted his grief like iron on the tongue, and more than that, she had begun to transmit again. It wasn't speech. She had no words left. It wasn't thought. The language center in her mind was too dulled by captivity, but there was something deeper. Image, emotion, scent, motion, heartbeat. They had become her new alphabet. That night, they both slept again, and the world they returned to was not quite a dream and not quite real. It was a shared space, built from one man's guilt and one woman's memory of harmony. They stood beneath a sky that changed color with every breath. Mountains rose in the distance, shaped like broken temples. Clouds drifted like prayers unraveling. And between them, in the air swam thousands of glowing symbols, unreadable, beautiful, like fish made of starlight. Eli looked at her. "I don't understand," he said aloud. She didn't speak, but in response she raised her hand, placed it gently over her heart, and then extended it toward him. The message was clear. Listen, not with ears, not with logic, with the center of him. He stepped closer. The moment his hand touched hers, a surge of memory bloomed across the space between them. A night under siege, Mara's blood on his palms, a prayer choked in his throat. A silver lake on Leirya, young Leirya placing her fingers into the water, feeling the planet hum beneath her, the scent of ash, the warmth of wind across shoulders, the sound of a bell that never existed. Each one passed between them like light through crystal. No translation needed, no time to question, only knowing. Back on the station, in the real world, both their bodies twitched, sensors spiked, monitors blinked, but no alarms were raised. No one understood what was happening, because what passed between them was not in the range of any technology. It was soul tone, and it resonated. When Eli awoke, he found his hand still outstretched, as if it had reached for something in the dark. His skin tingled. The pendant on his chest pulsed faintly, as though responding to a frequency no longer his alone. He sat in silence for a long while, and then whispered, not to anyone, Leirya. In the dark, on her side of the station, Leirya opened her eyes and smiled. For the first time in years, they didn't need words now. They didn't need explanation. Each time Eli drifted into sleep, he met her in the field of silver grass. Each time Leirya closed her eyes, she felt his pain soften beneath her touch. No one saw their meetings. But something had shifted. Something the scientists could not chart. Their biological signals began to sync. Their sleep cycles overlapped. Their pulses stabilized into one rhythmic pattern, 2 hearts. Beating in resonance, they had become something new. Not lovers, not yet, but linked. In the ancient texts of the Neurali, there was a word, verumean, to share breath through dream. A kind of spiritual intimacy once reserved only for the highest bond-bearers of the temple caste. It had not been recorded in over a century, until now. And in the dark void beyond the station, the stars blinked brighter. The weave shifted, and somewhere, unseen by all but felt by those attuned, the rhythm whispered, "The bond has begun." Chapter 4, the Omega Protocol. There was a shift in the data. Not a spike, not a glitch, a pattern. One the machines couldn't name, but the scientists couldn't ignore. It began in the early hours, when the station's biosignal monitors picked up an unusual resonance spike originating from Containment Chamber 9. The subject, Unit 341N. Codename Leirya. Dr. Ansel Morek stood motionless before the display wall, hands clasped behind his back. The room was dim, filled with a soft blue glow from dozens of floating holographic data windows. Lines of biosignal telemetry shimmered like soundless symphonies, until now mostly flat. Predictable. Muted. Now, the readings danced. Complex harmonic layering, spontaneous neural conductivity, echo fields forming in the limbic channels. "It's impossible," muttered one of the junior researchers. "It's omega reactive," said Morek quietly, "just like the theory." In the upper corner of the screen, a side panel displayed a time-synced biosignal overlay. Two waveforms, Leirya's and Eli Kairos's. They had begun to mirror each other. Heart rate, breathing rhythm, neural response time, even micro-muscle tension. Two systems that should have been alien, incompatible, drifting on parallel planes. Now, synchronized. "Initiate a full-body resonance scan," Morek ordered. "I want molecular telemetry, epigenetic drift maps, and deep core neurological readings. No anesthetics. I want her natural response." "Sir?" One tech hesitated. "That could cause trauma. She is not a patient. She's a system. Run the scan." Elsewhere, Leirya lay on the padded surface of her chamber, still awake. She had felt it. The vibration through the floor, the buzz of redirected power, the whisper of fear running like current through the metal skin of the station. Not hers, theirs. They had seen it, felt it. The change inside her. What they didn't understand, they would probe. What they couldn't control, they would cut. Eli stood in the corridor outside the observation deck, arms crossed watching them. The science team moved like surgeons preparing for dissection. Calm, efficient, cold. He had seen this before. Different battlefield, same eyes, people who called themselves experts while they dismantled miracles. He tapped his calm. "Dr. Morek, why is she being prepped for full-body scan protocol? That wasn't authorized." A pause. "New data, Commander," came the reply. "An anomaly worth exploring. Potential evolutionary intelligence. We believe she's undergoing spontaneous recursive self-adaptation. We might be looking at the first stable case of omega symbiosis." "She's not a case. She's a person." "That's not your call." The comm went silent. Back in the lab, they strapped her down. No restraints, just fields of soft energy pressure to keep her still. They didn't sedate her. They wanted her conscious, wanted to see what her brain did under stress. As the scanner arc lowered over her body, her tendrils flared, not violently, but with a shimmer of warning. A hum began to build in the air, too low for the ear, too deep for instrumentation. The head technician adjusted the feed, initiating resonance probe. The scanner lit up, and the walls shivered. It wasn't pain, it was exposure. Leirya felt the frequencies crawl across her skin, piercing her deeper than nerves. They reached into her mind, into memory, into identity. They tried to read things that were never meant to be read. Ceremonies, songs, burial dreams, the first memory of touch. And then, like a fault line cracking, they touched the rhythm. A harmonic surge exploded across the lab's sensors, knocking out power for 3 seconds. Screens went black, data wiped, backup systems triggered emergency shutdown. When the lights returned, Leirya was floating, unbound, untouched by any harness, her body slowly rotating above the scan bed, her skin glowing with lines of ancient light. The tendrils from her head had lifted completely, stretching like antennae toward some unseen horizon. Her eyes were open, and every researcher had stepped back. Eli reached her room 5 minutes later. But the door was sealed, locked from inside the lab's override. He slammed his palm against the glass. "What are you doing to her?" Morek stood inside, watching monitors reset. "What we should have done from the start," he said. "We're on the edge of something enormous." "You mean breaking open something sacred and seeing what bleeds?" "She's replicating herself at the subneural level. It's cloning without division. One cell, one frequency, duplicating the pattern of thought, not the structure. The pattern. It's technology grown from belief." Eli's voice was a whisper now, sharp and low. "You're gonna dissect her, aren't you?" "We're gonna understand her, then we'll see how far the code runs. Maybe we can make more." Leirya sat in silence now, breath steady, eyes closed. But inside she was listening, not to the machines, not to the scientists, to Eli. His voice was a line through the chaos, a steady current. He didn't say much, but his intention was enough. It pulled her back from the noise. Later that night, Eli received a private message from Morek, Project Omega Expansion. Subject 341N approved for Stage 2, neural biopsy and reproductive tissue analysis. Observation begins 600. There was no signature, just a single line at the bottom. You were never meant to be part of this. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he stood and went to find her. Not as a soldier, not as a priest, but as the only one who still saw her as whole. Chapter 5. Flight from the Faithless. The alarms came first, then the red lights, then the lockdown orders. But by the time security reached Containment Lab 9, the door was already open, and Leirya was gone. Eli moved like he had on the battlefield, fast, quiet, precise. He knew the station's blind spots, its overlapping security fields, the gaps between automated surveillance sweeps. But what he didn't expect was how Leirya moved with him. Silent, fluid. As if she'd been waiting her whole life for this exact moment. She didn't ask questions. She followed. And for a few brief minutes, it felt less like escape and more like destiny finally unfolding. They cut through Maintenance Deck E, past flickering conduits and half-lit corridors. The path led them downward, toward the lower hangar, a place where old shuttles waited like forgotten bones. Eli keyed in an override. The doors groaned open. Inside, the shuttle rested like a slumbering bird of prey. Black, angular, a relic from a forgotten war, its name etched into its hull in faded white, Seraph 3. Leirya paused at the threshold. Her eyes shimmered in the flickering hangar light. "This ship," she whispered, "remembers flight." Eli glanced at her. "Let's make sure it remembers freedom too." The engines groaned awake with an ancient cough, lights flaring in sequence. As the docking clamps released, the ship shuddered, then leapt. Out into the void. Chase ships launched minutes later. But Seraph 3 was already gone. Its signature vanished into the swirling nebulae of the outer belt. A belt known in forgotten star maps as the Murmur Fields. Inside the shuttle, the interior of Seraph 3 was compact but elegant. Obsolete by modern standards, yes, but built during the age of manual flight and spiritual design, when ships were blessed, not just programmed. The cockpit smelled of old leather, ion fuel, and dust. But in the rear chamber, something stirred. Leirya stood near a small porthole, gazing out at the stars. Eli approached her slower now. "They'll come after us," he said. She nodded, then turned to face him. Her expression, calm, luminous, had changed. She looked older, not in age but in presence, like someone who had just stepped back into their purpose. "They don't fear what I am," she said softly. "They fear what I might remember." The ship passed into the Murmur Fields. Outside, the void was of black. It shimmered with thin, waving curtains of starlight and drifting energy. Great, sweeping veils of color moved through the field like underwater auroras, blues, purples, silver fire. The stars blinked in ancient patterns, unreadable to human sensors. But not to Leirya. She stepped toward the central hollow table and reached out, not to touch but to resonate. The console lit up without prompt. Not by code, by recognition. Eli watched as lines of alien script, fluid, glowing, musical, appeared in the air, rotating gently around her. "What is this?" he asked. "A map," she said. "Not of space, of meaning." Then she turned to him. Her voice was steady, but deep with something old, a gravity not of this world. "Eli, I am not a biological system. Not an interface, not a miracle to be dissected." She stepped forward. "I am a rhythm bearer. One of the last, a living thread between the will of the stars and the breath of life." Eli said nothing. He felt it. Not just in the air, but inside him, in his chest. The same hum from the dreams, the same light behind her eyes. Leirya raised her hand, and as her palm hovered near his chest, the ship itself seemed to exhale. For a moment, time fell away. He saw images not with his eyes, but with his soul. A temple of light woven into clouds, children with glowing tendrils learning to listen to planets. A dying sun singing its last lullaby. Hands not taking but joining with other species, binding faith across galaxies, he gasped. The images faded. "This is what they fear," she said. "Not what I am, but what I could awaken in others." Outside, something shifted. The nebulae in the Murmur Fields parted slightly like curtains pulled back, and through them emerged a monolith. Black, floating, etched with markings that pulsed as Seraph 3 approached. Leirya placed her hand on the ship's console. "This is the first shrine of the rhythm," she said. "Long forgotten, hidden in light." Eli leaned forward. "A temple? A memory," she said. "A living memory of a time when faith was coded in biology and truth traveled as song." As the ship hovered, a low tone filled the cabin. Not from the ship, not from speakers, but from the monolith itself. It was a note, long, low, full of weight and warmth. Leirya closed her eyes and hummed back. The moment she did, the walls of the monolith opened, petals of obsidian peeling back to reveal a core of swirling light. Inside, nothing mechanical, only frequencies, color, and motion. The ship matched the tone, and for the first time in his life, Eli felt like he was not in space, but in a cathedral built by the stars themselves. "This is not just escape," Leirya said. "It's the beginning of something they cannot undo." "A new war?" Eli asked. "No," she said, and then she smiled, softly. For the first time in his memory, a return. Chapter 6, The Final Touch. It happened fast, too fast. One moment they were gliding through the murmur fields, past glimmering threads of starlight and sacred echoes. The next, impact, a flash, a tremor, a gutting sound of metal torn open. Then the alarm. Red, blinding. The voice of Seraph 3 whispering calmly, "Hull breach, life support compromised, primary pilot injured." Leirya stumbled as the ship spun. Gravity shifted. Sparks rained down. She crawled across the tilted floor of the cockpit, her hands slipping in dark red. Her fingers met fabric, then flesh. "Ella." He lay crumpled near the console, a shard of metal buried deep in his abdomen. His breathing was ragged, each exhale wet and shallow. "Eli." Her voice cracked, no longer a whisper of air, but a sound born of something deeper. His eyes fluttered open, glazed, searching. He smiled. "I messed up the landing." She pressed her hand to his wound. The blood soaked her palm instantly. Too much, too fast. The ship's systems were failing. The sacred shrine they'd entered had answered her call, but someone else had followed. A long-range drone, old tech but brutal. It had struck them before dissolving in the sacred field. Now Eli was dying, and she could feel him fading. Not just physically, energetically. The rhythm between them faltered. The bond strained. Her soul screamed. She reached into herself, past memory, past language, into the core, where the ancient ones had once walked in silence, where thought dissolved into frequency and identity became resonance. It was still there, the old power, dormant, buried, forbidden. She had always known that to use it meant not returning. The last rhythm bearer had done it centuries ago, sacrificed herself to preserve the life of a dying sun being. Their souls had merged, created a new species, but she never came back. Now it was Leirya's turn. She hovered over him, her glowing tendrils lifting and separating, becoming lines of light in the dim red glow. "Stay with me," she whispered. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Leirya, don't." Her hands hovered over his heart. She closed her eyes and began the transfer. The chamber filled with soundless motion. Her body rose inches from the floor, light pouring from her skin, from the glyphs across her arms and chest. They weren't just patterns now, they were rune work. Ancient living scripture pulsing with divine energy. The console lights flickered, and from the shrine outside the monoliths began to hum, low, deep, matching her heartbeat. She sent her soul forward. A bridge. The light from her hands passed into Eli's chest, not violently, not surgically, but like a memory being shared. A note from a song he had forgotten he knew. His body spasmed, he gasped, and in that moment, they were together. Truly. He saw her past. He was her, barefoot in temple gardens, watching stars fall like petals. He was a child of Leirya, hands pressed against a living tree that sang the names of unborn things. He felt her exile, her pain, the cage, and he knew her name, not just Leirya but her full name in the old tongue. Leirya, she who listens to the voice between worlds. But even as his wounds closed, as his heart began to beat stronger, hers slowed. Her light began to fade, gently, like candle smoke rising upward. Eli sat up, choking with panic. No, don't do this. Don't leave." She smiled softly, her form barely solid now. Her tendrils drifted like mist in zero gravity. "You called me by name," she said. "Mine, not a label, not a file. You were the first." A tear fell from his eye. "That's not worth this." She reached for his face. Her fingers shimmered, translucent, almost gone. "Yes, it is. I was forgotten. You remembered me. You named me." She leaned forward, pressed her forehead to his, and whispered, "Let me be part of the world through you." He clutched her to him, sobbing now, as the light enveloped them both. A final pulse of sound, low, holy, pure, rippled outward. Then, silence. The monoliths outside dimmed. The shrine closed, and the Seraph 3 floated in the void, lights flickering back on slowly. Eli lay on the floor, alone, but not quite. He breathed, deep, alive. And within him, something else breathed too, a second rhythm, softer, familiar. Every now and then he heard a word, a name, a hum that echoed in the marrow of his bones. Leirya. He looked down at his hands. They glowed faintly for just a moment, then faded. She was gone, but she had not died. She had become part of him, of the rhythm, of the stars. Chapter 7. The Shared Soul Silence. Not the kind that follows death, but the kind that lingers after something holy has passed through a room. Eli Kairos sat alone in the cockpit of the Seraph 3. His hands rested on the console, unmoving. His eyes were open, but distant, looking not at the stars outside the viewport, but at something far deeper, something within. The wound on his body had healed, but not the space she left behind. He no longer heard the ship's systems hum. He no longer saw the blinking lights. What he noticed now was far subtler, a rhythm, soft, consistent, like a pulse in the floor, like breath in the metal. It came not from the engines, but from the walls themselves, from the stars, from his own chest. It was her. At first he thought it was a hallucination, a memory echo, but then he began to see it in the readings. Tiny anomalies. On the Seraph's ancient neural interface, the bio panel flickered with an irregular signal. Not random, not mechanical. A repeating frequency, dancing across wavelengths like music encoded in silence. He ran diagnostics, checked energy leaks, scanned his own implants, reset everything. Still it remained, a heartbeat. Not his. Each night, when he finally closed his eyes, she returned. Not in voice, not in form, but in sensation. He would find himself standing again in that silver field, the dream space that belonged to neither past nor future. The sky would shift with each breath. The stars would blink in her cadence. And somewhere nearby, he would hear her hum. Leirya, he whispered into the silence of space. Where did you go? The universe did not answer. But the stars leaned closer. He no longer knew what time meant. He had set the Seraph 3 on a slow drift. It glided through the remains of the murmur fields, through relic light and forgotten pathways. He no longer spoke to command. He no longer checked reports. He only listened. Then one day, the console lit up. Just one line of code, faint, scrawled across the diagnostic screen. Vroomian signal detected. Origin unknown. Stability active. He stared at it for a long time, then smiled. He knew what he had to do. He began to speak, not to anyone, but to her. He routed the Seraph's communication array through old relay satellites, abandoned listening posts, derelict space beacons. He patched together a network of dying machines, a constellation of ghosts. And through them he spoke. His voice, calm, low, steady, became a prayer carried on solar winds. This is Eli Kairos. I am alive, and I remember. I remember your name, Leirya. He said it every day, sometimes twice. Sometimes all he did was say it, out loud, into the quiet, like lighting a candle inside a cathedral that had no roof. Weeks passed. The signal persisted. Its pattern changed subtly, like it was listening. Sometimes it pulsed faster when he spoke. Sometimes it stilled when he wept. And so he kept going. He recorded his heartbeat, his dreams, his voice, reading fragments of the old Earth prayers he barely remembered. Not for religion, but for ritual. Because ritual was the last form of faith he understood. He spoke her name not to remember her, but so that the universe would remember her. One day, a message came back, but it wasn't from a person. It was from a forgotten probe on the edge of a dead sun, pinging back a reflection of his transmission. Not text, not code, a sound. 2 notes, simple, beautiful, identical to the tone the shrine had emitted when Leirya merged with the rhythm. He played it on repeat. And when he slept that night, the field was brighter. In his dreams, she stood just beyond reach, but she smiled. "You're still here," he whispered. She nodded. "So are you." He reached toward her, but she didn't take his hand. Instead, she placed hers over her own heart, then over his. And the field around them began to bloom. Stars grew like flowers. The sky opened like a mouth of light, and in that breathless moment, he understood. She hadn't vanished. She had simply gone where language could no longer follow. She was in the pulse of planets, in the memory of roots, in the space between heartbeat and thought, and in him, always. Now, wherever the Seraph 3 passed, systems recorded anomalies, small surges, tiny pulses in comm channels, lights blinking in non-standard rhythms, machines humming unfamiliar chords. The scientists who found the traces called it a mystery. But Eli knew better. He called it her name. And every night, as the stars wheeled overhead, he whispered the same words. Leirya, You are not gone, you are only deeper now, and I will keep saying your name until the stars learn how to sing it. Chapter 8. Return. There are planets that have been forgotten, worlds where no ships land, no signals reach, no names remain, but the stars still know them. They whisper over their quiet atmospheres like wind across stone. And on one such world, a hushed, broken place where oceans once sang and cities once bloomed, something moved. Not a ship, not a human, but a presence. It shimmered before it solidified. It pulsed before it breathed. It hovered 3 feet above the blackened soil of the wasteland, a shape not wholly there, not wholly gone, half light, half flesh. A body outlined in radiant silver, wrapped in threads of vapor that moved like memory. Within that shape were glimpses, shards of something once human, once Norelli, once divine. Eyes that reflected no sky, hands that never touched but made everything around them tremble gently. Hair? No, tendrils of light, drifting like slow-burning comets. Suspended in still air, it made no footsteps, it made no sound, until it spoke. I heard my name, and I remembered. The voice echoed, not through the air but inside the stones, inside the windless trees. Not a sound, a resonance. Across the wasteland, nothing stirred. But something ancient listened. The figure, neither male nor female, but somehow both, walked without walking. Where it passed, dust lifted and light bent, soft as water disturbed by breath. It paused near a broken monument, half-buried, weather-worn, unreadable. The being reached out. The monument glowed faintly. A glyph awakened on its surface. Ah, the word, the bond, the bridge between. Somewhere far away, the Seraph 3 drifted on autopilot. Inside, Kairos slept. He had not spoken in days. He had no more voice to give. He had whispered her name 1,000 times. He had searched 1,000 channels, sent pulses, prayers. But now, he only dreamed. And in his dream, he stood once more in the field of silver grass. Except this time, it was burning. The grass turned to ash beneath his feet. The stars above blinked in strange patterns, and the sky cracked, revealing something beneath. He looked up and saw her. But she was different now, brighter. Not in body, but in presence. Her eyes held galaxies. Her breath came in light. She smiled. You remembered. I never stopped, he said. She extended her hand. He reached, but before their fingers met, she stopped. You are still bound to time. And you? I am rhythm now, echo, seed. Eli felt tears on his cheeks. Are you gone? I am becoming. Suddenly, the Seraph's long-range sensor pinged. Low, faint, unusual. Eli jolted awake, heart pounding. The screen displayed a single reading. Unclassified energy pattern, coherent phased consciousness, location, unmapped system, coordinates drift stable. He stared at the signal. He didn't speak, but his fingers moved. He turned the ship, quietly, deliberately, toward the source. Back on the forgotten planet, the being sat cross-legged before the monument, eyes closed. It hummed, not as a song, but as a remembering. And around it, the very air shimmered. Particles of matter reorganized themselves in patterns that no science could explain. The grass began to grow again. The sky deepened in color. Life was listening. From above, a distant silhouette appeared on the edge of the sky. A ship, small, gray, old. The Seraph. Eli sat at the controls, barely breathing. As the ship descended, he could already feel it, the rhythm pulsing through the hull, matching the beat of his own chest. He opened the hatch, stepped out onto the softening soil, and saw the being waiting for him. They did not speak. They didn't have to. He approached slowly, reverently, as if walking into the holiest of temples. When he stood before it, her, he whispered, Leirya? The being opened its eyes, and within them he saw stars he'd never seen and all the ones they had dreamed of together. It reached out, not to touch, but to rest a hand inches from his heart. And in that space, he felt her, all of her. Memories, grief, hope, wonder, and love. You gave me your name, she said. Now I give you the rest of me. He wept, and the wind began to sing. The camera would pull back now if this were a film. Up and away until they were only 2 small lights on a vast healing world. One man, one echo, one rhythm. Together again, and far beyond across the galaxies, sensors would continue to pick up an untraceable signal, a pulse, a name, carried like a hymn, Leirya. Out there, something is still listening. The signal hasn't stopped, and neither has he. The story isn't over. It's only changed shape. This is Sci-Fi Sky, and in the next chapter, the stars will answer.